All right, thank you all for being here. I'll call the executive session of the Finance Committee to order, and note that we have two replacements. Replacing Sharon Nordgren, we have Representative Myler, and replacing Representative Murray, we have Representative Luno. All right, call the meeting to order for the exec session on House Bill 1560. I'll call on Division 2 Chair, Representative Emmerich, for a report from that division.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Wrong room.
Okay.
This bill came to us, we had a work session on a Monday. Basically, what the bill does is it takes the surplus, which is unspent and allocated funds from the Education Trust Fund at the end of the year and moves it into the general fund. It does not eliminate the Educational Trust Fund. It just says, rather than keeping cash unavailable to the state, at the end of the year, any funds that are not spent or allocated will move into the general fund. Mr. Landrigan has prepared under current law, what the Educational Trust Fund would look like in the biennium. So as you can see, by the end of the biennium, without this, there's approximately $222 million that are going to be sitting unavailable to any other activity except education in the state. So what this would do is, we would never make it there if, in fact, it started in FY 2024, because at the end of FY 2024, 182 million or whatever was unallocated or spent would go into the general fund. So I would look to Representative Pofici Mueller to make a motion.
Thank you. I would like to make the OTP motion for Bill 1560.
Is there, and there is a second?
Second.
Representative Earth seconds. Further discussion? Representative Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we've heard a lot about education, and we are very fortunate in the last couple of years that we have had money remaining in the Educational Trust, and we have been able to add any number of areas that belong to education. We have episodic treatment, that this is the first biennium that we're going to see it. Already the costs are anticipated at around $7 million. We also are in the midst of a funding lawsuit. We know that we're going to be running into some issues. We have a committee right now, a special committee appointed by the Speaker, dealing with this. I believe this bill belongs there. It does not belong right here. We are at a point where we may need those dollars to increase the amount of funding that we're giving to our adequacy funding. So I would ask that we, at this point in time, defer this bill to the special committee on education funding that is actually going to meet tomorrow. This is not the time to mess around with the Education Trust. What message are we sending to the public by emptying out the Education Trust? What message does that send to those individuals who are working hard to bring more funding to education? Our local property taxpayers are bearing 80% of the burden of our schools. We can talk more about the costs behind special education. So I think at this time, I won't belabor this issue. I've been clear on where I am on this point, but I think at this point in time, we would look very foolish by taking the step at this point in time. Thank you very much, Mr.
I would remind us all that we're restoring this part of the budget to where it was when it left this committee and went to the other body. They're the ones that messed this up. We had it all balanced. We gave education everything they needed, and much of it was general fund, as it has always been. The purpose of the Education Trust Fund was to fund adequacy. That was its beginning. That was its most prevalent use. Occasionally, some other monies were used, but all the other purposes for education, special ed, catastrophic aid, tuition and transportation, building aid, have always come from general fund. There's never been a problem whether there's money specifically in the Education Trust Fund, because we could always take it out of the general fund. But when we have a fund like Highway Fund, Fish and Game, monies can't go out of them. They can go in from the general fund, but they can't come out. And we would be stuck with the same situation if we have Education Trust Fund with 200 million in it, and we suddenly find that we're 100 million short on the litigation fund for the Sununu Youth Center. What are we going to do? So we need to have this flexibility. We, as the Finance Committee, need to have the flexibility to have more money in the general fund for whatever's coming ahead. So that's why I put in this bill, because I think it's foolish to have money in the Education Trust Fund that's tied up and can't be used, even though everything has been covered that was requested for education. Any further? Any further? Representative Hacken Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm going to join my colleague, Representative Heath, in calling for this bill to, instead of being exec here today, for the ought to pass, but to be sent to the Subcommittee of Education. And that's for 3 reasons. The first is that this past election cycle, I canvassed over 1,000 doors in my district, and the number 1 priority issue of my constituents was to fund public education. It was not, in fact, to drain the Education Trust Fund. I think that there's probably very few Granite Staters who understand the intricacies of what the trust fund does, and this is not something they're asking for. So I think we have to recognize we're not reflecting the will of the Granite Staters right now by entertaining this motion. Second, the process of our committee receiving the bill Monday, being designated to our subcommittee on Monday afternoon, and then the work session that happened Monday afternoon, led us to today, 4 days later. I think we can all acknowledge that 4 days is a bit of a rush, and that there has been a lack of robust discussion about the intricacies of what this would actually mean for our state. Also, there was a concern that the AG did not weigh in on the RAND decision, and that there were many members of Subdivision 2 who had questions about the interpretation of that order and our obligation as Division 2 members to fulfill that. As well as also having several members not being present that day. And while it is true that the committee recommendation vote would probably have led to this moment anyway, I think it's worth acknowledging that the people who are most invested and knowledgeable about the situation were not included in the discussion. Third, I think that this is probably not a prudent move given the several unknowns that Representative Heath just spoke about. But I'd also like to talk about a history that was discussed in subcommittee of the general fund not being adequate to fill the Education Trust Fund fully when there have been instances that the Education Trust Fund needed additional funding. So we know that the statement that the general fund can backfill whatever we need is not entirely true. We also know that the continuing warrant articles within the appropriations list, lines 19 through 44, mean that we don't know what the ending balances will be for actual or estimated 24 and 25. That these are just our estimates, our projections, but we all know that those warrants can be much larger than estimated, given several unknowns about, for instance, special education requirements in our communities. Finally, I'd just like to remind the committee that this RAND decision is really important and the public is watching. They are aware of what the court has ordered and they will be watching the way we react. And I would charge that the most prudent thing to do would be to put this issue before the subcommittee because they are tasked with that exact question. And how possibly can we make a reasonable, prudent decision about how much money we can spend in public education if we drain the trust fund before we know the answer to that question? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Your statement is inaccurate. Any money in the general fund can be used for education. Representative Propovici-Muller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to address I just want to clarify something here that the language of the bill does not say we are transferring 222,120,000 to the general fund. It says we're going to transfer surplus. I agree that there are contingencies that may happen that would require us to change the funding for the education. absolutely true, but any of those things can be addressed from the trust fund, and that will reduce any surplus that we may have. This is why the language says surplus and doesn't specify an amount. Specifying an amount would be imprudent. Saying just surplus is sound policy, and as I said, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Representative Stringham.
Yeah, thank you. I think any attempt to divert funds away from the New Hampshire Education Trust Fund is going to send a damaging message that our constituents will hear about our commitment to education. To do so at this time, when the courts have determined that we're both underfunding education and doing so in a way that is harming essential communities, particularly low property tax towns, will be heard. Our educators work tirelessly to provide the best possible learning environment for our students, and we owe it to them and our future generations to protect the integrity of the New Hampshire Education Trust Fund, and this is going to be seen as an attack on education, even if we can move money around when we need it. It's going to be perceived that way. I don't think it's the right time to do this, and I'd recommend voting against it.
Against a faulty perception. Let me ask this question. How many saw that property taxes go down in 2023 over 2022? Anybody? Isn't that interesting? We gave 100 million from SWEPT. We gave 26 million in the retirement contribution. 126 million went to all the towns and cities to reduce the property taxes. How much did it reduce them? So don't get carried away with exaggerating things about what the public even knows about the Education Trust Fund. All they know is we fully funded education. There's more money available if need be. Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to dispel this comment about education funding for adequacy. One of the points that was made, I'm on that subcommittee, and one of the points that was made is we cannot use surplus to satisfy adequacy. Adequacy has to come out of funding in the period, not from past periods. So surplus like this cannot be used to fund adequacy.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we all know that the Education Trust Fund is a polite fiction. When we budget the Education Trust Fund and the general fund as a single unit. When we look at the surplus statement, for example, they're always combined, right? And so already there's the opposite of this bill in the sense that if the Education Trust Fund was ever low, it would get filled to the right amount, to the amount needed, the amount budgeted from the general fund. This is the complementary piece, right, that really makes them one unit. The reason that the Education Trust Fund has extra funds at this time is simply because the amount put into it is a certain fraction of BPT and a certain fraction of BET and a certain fraction of all this other taxes you see listed here. And there's nothing magical about those percentages, right? I mean, if the percentage, let's say, I don't even know what the percentage is, but let's say it was 30% of the BPT. And this year, the BPT happens to be a lot bigger than necessary for education. It's foolish to force that 30% to be some kind of a magic number that can't be changed, right? We have a lot of requirements for Medicaid and provider payments and on and on and on. So we balance, when we create a budget, we balance one expense against another. We've decided already for this biennium how much education should get and how much these other things should get. We're collecting new bills and new spending requests, and having the money in the general fund is the most flexible place to put it. Thank you.
Those percentages, when we left the budget, we took 22% of the business taxes into the Education Trust Fund to cover adequacy. The proposal that came to us from the governor used 35%. We sent it on to the Senate at the 22%. They made it 44%, twice what we put into it, even though we knew that would result in a surplus. That's what it did. So it tied up money that could be used anywhere else in the budget, including education. It was a bad decision, which I'm trying to overcome with this bill. Thank you. Anything further? Representative Hewitt.
Usually I talk so loud, nobody. Anyway, we've been talking about education in terms of all the different things that go into the funding of education and everything else that is appropriated in its general milieu. What I've observed since the whole debate started several years ago is discussions about schools and about kids, and not about how much should go into this fund or that fund or the next fund. In that connection, this is completely unexpected. I'd like to read you a short letter that I received this morning at 10:16 a.m. I believe you sit on the Finance Committee. HB 1560 came before your committee on January 29th, I believe. The bill wants to take money from the Educational Trust Fund and put it into the general fund. I hope you oppose this with every ounce of your being. The ETF is supposed to be used to fund public education, and we all know that the state is short-changing public education. The recent November Supreme Court ruling stated it should be double what it is currently funding. What this points out is not necessarily the facts that the letter writer has put out, but it's also relating the facts to what people have been talking about all this time. The problems that have been discussed anytime you mention the Educational Trust Fund or any of that stuff is education, kids, providing a good, solid education to all of our children. And we hear debates all the time. We hear some once in a while in this committee about how we're not doing enough or we're not doing it right or people have done something horrible. So I don't think that it's a good idea to just, out of a clear blue sky, and believe me, I'm sorry I wasn't here on Monday, but out of a clear blue sky, the legislature steps up and all of a sudden decides that, well, maybe we ought to take the money out of there and start spreading it around other places where we think we need it. I haven't heard anybody say that there's anything that we need that is so important that we ought to tell the public, well, we can't keep all the money in the Education Trust Fund because we don't know what is going to happen at the end of this fiscal year. And so I would not be in favor of taking any action that would affect the Education Trust Fund at this time.
There's a lot of misinformation going around. I was with the Education Trust Fund from its inception. And there were many years when we deliberately underfunded what we even thought was adequacy because we wanted to make it up with money from other sources, especially the general fund. Because what we found out was if we sent money to, if we deliberately assigned money to the Department of Ed that wasn't needed, they spent it anyway. And that was what we feared. There was one time we got done, we put all the money that we thought we needed into education, and then the estimate for the lottery came in $4 million more than we thought it would be. And we said, what do we do now? And we said to the education department, any way we can get this money back? No, we'll spend it. That was the reply we got. So after that, we said, all right, we'll figure out how much they need. We'll make it a little less because we know they'll spend everything we send them. And by the way, we spend more than 45 other states. And are we at the top of the 45 other states? No. We're not doing that well. For all the money we're spending $20,000 per public school student, while when we have someone in a charter school, we spend $9,000, and they still get a good education. If they go to Education Freedom Account, they get $5,000 each. And they still are happier there than in this education at $20,000 per student. So it's not being competitive. It's not providing what it should. It just spends a lot of money without us seeing the effect. And I think somebody has, probably the teachers union, has spread a lot of misinformation that if we take money out of the education trust fund that is not needed in the education department, then we're being evil. That is such a misrepresentation and such baloney that's been pulled out by the teachers union and others. I'm really distressed by that. We are here to make sense out of the whole budget and to manage the finances of the state. And by saying, oh, we got to leave money in the education trust fund, even though we have not purposed it anywhere, is a big misinformation. Because I know one thing that might go well over what we thought it would be. We put $100 million into the challenges on the Sonoma Youth Center. The last time we met in fiscal, it seems like they're overspending that by a lot more. That's something that's already been approved, so that's kind of an open thing. There's nothing here in education that's open at this time, but that's open. I know we're going to be asking for more money there, and I don't want everything tied up where we could use another few million out of education trust funds that are going, that if we put them in the general fund, we can cover that. That's open, it's there, it's a commitment. All the commitments in education have been funded, so all these other arguments are spurious in my mind. Representative Lanou.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To my understanding, the only blank check out of the Education Trust Fund is for the Education Freedom Account voucher program. The adequacy payments are actually defined by statute, so they're not, the Department of Education is not able to expend that money willy-nilly. It's defined in statute. The only amount that's a blank check is for vouchers. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to explain to anyone who wants to listen to me why I'm going to vote to OTP this. One, it looks to me, based on this spreadsheet, that the monies for education have been appropriated. And nobody's talking about reducing the amount of money that's been appropriated based on what's on the spreadsheet. So the money is there, it's fine. Then the second thing is the 222 million. To me, the way I look at that is this is an administrative reservation of funds. Because you administratively reserve funds, that's a different thing than actually trying to appropriate money to spend on a program. And so where that money sits in its administrative reservation is really not the relevant issue. The issue is which programs do you care to fund? And so I'm not hung up on the administrative reservation piece of this. The third thing is that the appropriations are programs that have been funded, and that is completely distinct from the source of money that may be coming in. To say 22% of BPT, 18% of BPT, whatever the percent of a revenue number is, that's when you're looking at revenue. It has nothing to do with the programs that you want to invest in. So I think we really need to look more at programs than we are the source of money. And I know I sit in healthcare and not in education, but I would love it a lot. I would feel a lot better about spending money if I heard about programs that were intended to improve the quality of education. Education in New Hampshire is not doing all that great from what I can tell from the scores. And so if we invested in programs that would make kids smarter, I would be up for that conversation. And then I would say, we don't know what the future is, but I could see that we need some flexibility. The nation is being invaded. States all over the country are getting hit with enormous unanticipated bills. And so far, I haven't heard of New Hampshire having that happen to them. But I don't know what makes us exceptional. The illegal invasion is coming. It's going to cost us money. We better have some money available. So I'm gonna vote for this primarily because I don't see the connection between an administrative reservation of money and the intelligent application of money on actual academic programs.
Any further discussion? Be aware that we've been cautioned not to go late because we're holding up the staff. They don't want to pay overtime. Representative Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned is about 10 years ago, we had about 221,000 kids in public schools. We now have about 155,000. So this extra money that's coming in is it just sits there and not helping the kids because adequacy is set in statute, like we've heard. So I'm going to be voting yes on this motion.
Representative Buckel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question about how do we address all these encumbrances against the Education Trust Fund? In RSA 19839, there's a whole page full of encumbrances, including adequacy grants and also adequacy grants to the chartered schools, chartered public schools, grants to kindergartens, and every one of them has the same language in it. If required expenditures exceed amounts appropriated, then the commissioner is authorized to request additional funding from the fiscal committee, and that funding shall be a charge to the Education Trust Fund.
We've funded all those things. We put it in the budget. I don't remember anybody ever coming to the fiscal committee to ask for more money for education because they were shorted. And I've been on fiscal committee for 12 years. So if it's necessary, it will come to us. And we will fund it. But I've never seen a request come through education in 12 years. Mr. Landrigan, any comment on what he said? Okay. Any further discussion? I'd like to get to the roll call because of time. If there's no further discussion, the clerk will call the roll. The motion is ought to pass on House Bill 1560, 1560.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Earth.
Yes.
Representative McGuire.
Yes.
Representative Petrie votes yes. Representative Emmerich.
Yes.
Representative Griffin.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Edwards.
Yes.
Representative Bean.
Yes.
Representative Hole.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Cambrils.
Yes.
Representative Popovici Muller.
Yes.
Representative Wallner.
No.
Representative Myler.
No.
Representative Leishman.
No.
Representative Bucco.
No.
Representative Hewitt.
No.
Representative Heath.
No.
Representative Luno.
No.
Representative Ebel.
No.
Representative Telersky.
No.
Representative Haken Phillips.
No.
Representative Stringham.
No.
Representative Grassi.
No.
Representative Weiler.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 13 to 12 in favor of the motion.
All right. Is there going to be a minority report? We need it right now.
You will have it as soon as I get home, and I will.
No, no.
No.
You can't leave the room.
I will stay.
That's the order of the speaker.
I will stay, Mr.
All right,
Chair.
well, I will review.
No.
And I believe Representative Emmerich or Representative Popovici has the majority report ready.
Okay.
I have to review those.
So Heath is responsible.
The minority report will be from Representative Heath. Get that down. Okay. So,
Motion is.
thank you all. We are adjourned.